Yeah, awesome. Cool. Okay. Uh, so first, we're going to look at verses where people are showing a lack of trust in God, and then from there, we're going to talk about we're just going to talk about that verse. So the first verse we're going to talk about is going to be coming from Numbers. It's going to be Numbers chapter 14, verses 1 all the way up to verses 4. So yeah, if you want, you can pull that up. I'm going to pull it up right now. So yeah. Okay, so let me make sure I can. Okay, yeah. So numbers. So this is, if you don't know what numbers is essentially where another part of the Israelites' journey in to the promised land. If you read numbers and just all the, like, for example, like if you read their journey, like from Exodus, Leviticus to Numbers, um, I think all the way up to Deuteronomy, you'll understand how ridiculous the Israelites were and how we kind of reflect the Israelites in a way when it comes to our lives. Like they were just not trusting in God at all. But this is another example of where they just didn't trust Him. So let's start reading. The people rebel. Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, "Would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in the wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives, our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt?" And they said to one another, "Let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt." Right? So, yet again, the reason why the Israelites were doing this was because they actually just got to a land that they were meant to pass through. I think it was either pass through or they were meant to stay there for a time. And when they got there, they met the Nephilim. Now, for those of you who don't know what the Nephilim are, they are essentially giants. And not, when I say giants, I don't mean like people who are 6'7", or people who are 8 feet tall. I'm talking like 20 feet tall, 30 feet tall, 40 feet tall. For those of you who don't speak English, I'm talking about 20 meters tall, 10 meters tall, very, very tall things. Like the way they described it is that these people were so big that the Israelites were like grasshoppers to them. That's how big these people were. So they were giants, right? And of course, if they were going to stay there, they would have had to eventually fight those people. So this is why they're really like, they wept that night, right? Because from their understanding, if they do anything to upset these people or try to take this land or just try to be there in general and inhabit it, they're going to die. Because like I described, they are literally crickets compared to these people. They're tiny, right? And if you understand the Nephilim, you'll understand that the Nephilim, they aren't nice people, right? Like the Nephilim would do wicked things, and these weren't directly the Nephilim; these were ancestors, or sorry, descendants of the Nephilim. Because if you understand the book of, I think it was, if you understand what happened in the book of Genesis, God flooded the earth because there were a lot of things on the earth, and one of the things that was on the planet Earth was Nephilim. And the Nephilim then were much bigger than the Nephilim now. Like the Nephilim now, at this current time in numbers, are smaller than the Nephilim then. But the Nephilim back then were very wicked and evil. They would do things like kill people. They would eat people because they were so much bigger than them and they were just wicked, right? The kind of stuff you see in movies, right? How giants are always eating people, killing people, enslaving them, and just doing wicked things, right? So the Nephilim that we're seeing now are much smaller, but they're still descendants, and they can tell that they're descendants because they're just huge. These are immense people. These people would be the size of Goliath and a little bit taller. So that's how big these guys are. They're huge. Anyway, getting past the fact of how tall these guys are, this shook the Israelites' faith. And the reason why this is such a problem is because the Israelites, like, they were given chance after chance after chance after chance with God, right? The same way we're given chance after chance and chance with God, right? God gives us so many chances per day, per hour, per minute, right? And we doubt Him and doubt Him. Now, with the Israelites, it's much worse because of what God got them through before. God got them through hunger. God got them through thirst. He got them through wars. He got them out of Egypt, right? So for them to be complaining again, it's just bad, right? So if you continue to read, you'll understand that God will punish the Israelites because after this, and after God helps them out, they continue to still sin against Him and not trust Him. So we understand this is the first part we're going to get to too. This is the first part where we understand that people are not trusting God. So how does that look like in our lives? What are the Nephilim in our lives? What do we see that makes us not trust God? Something that I know is that whenever I'm studying for a test and I just don't get something, right? I'm sitting here thinking to myself, man, I'm not going to pass this test. Even though I've been praying to God all day, all night, all week, all month for this test to pass it, right? And I'm sitting here not trusting the process, right? The Israelites are an example of not trusting the process, right? And we all struggle with that in some way. Some of you might struggle to trust God to help you through something because the process looks difficult, or you've run into a certain part where it just looks impossible. Like, for example, those fighting giants, that sounds impossible to Israelites. You don't have giants in your life because you're not the Israelites, but you have a giant in your life, metaphorically, right? Whatever that may be, school, work, I don't know, something else. Maybe you have, for those of you who are older, it could be, paying rent or a bunch of other things, making sure you keep your job, secure that, right? For some of you, it could be sickness. But anyway, moving on from that, we're going to talk about verses next that support the idea, and I shouldn't even say support the idea, that tell us that we should trust God, right? So a verse that a lot of you are going to be akin to, and I'll stop streaming because this is really the only verse I wanted to show you guys directly. A verse that a lot of us are akin to when it comes to, thinking about verses that tell us to trust God. One of them would be Jeremiah 29, chapter 11, or Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 11. I know the plans for you. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and hope. So, what does this mean? It means that we as humans make our own plans, right? We all have our own goals in life, right? Some of us want to be super strong. Some of us want to be super smart. Some of us want to be super successful, right? It varies with each person. Some of us want to be rich, right? It all varies, right? So in this verse, God specifically is telling us he knows the plans he has for us, right? Plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and hope, right? So granted, you have your own plans, God has a plan. And if you're following God, you're going to have to understand that regardless of what your plan is, God's plan is going to prevail, regardless of what your plan is. If your plan could be to marry someone, right? But God's plan could be, yeah, that's going to happen, but you're not going to marry this person. You're going to marry this person, right? Because he understands what's best for you, right? And that's the biggest thing we have to understand when trusting God. He is not like anybody else. When you trust God, it's not like trusting your parents or trusting your friends or trusting your teacher. They can make mistakes and they could be lying to you. When you trust God, you know for a fact he's not lying to you and he's not going to make a mistake. He can see everything. Imagine distrusting someone who can see the future and is and they're your best. Like, imagine that you have a friend that's never lied to you before, and then he tells you a miraculous thing is going to happen, and you know he can see the future, and then you just distrust him. Like, I just don't think that's going to happen. Because I saw this the other day, and you would look stupid and you would look like a fool because you're not trusting someone who can see into the literal future. And not only can they see in the future, they're your best friend. So they're looking out for your best interests 100% of the time, which is what God's doing, right? And granted, we don't always want to follow God's plan, but you can definitely trust, not just trust, you can definitely trust that it's going to be right for you, right? So for example, I'm trying to think of an example in my life, right? One of the things I didn't trust God with is that when I was in high school, my sophomore year, I was just really confused on what to do once I got out of school, right? What to even do in school, right? Because everyone was doing their own thing. And I'm going to be honest with you, having ADHD makes it really interesting when it comes to picking something you want to do in life, right? So for example, right now, I'm a software developer. So what that means is that I do a lot of coding, right? I didn't understand how I would really get into that, but God helped me with that, right? And the process was very sloppy. And I shouldn't even say sloppy. It looked sloppy to me, but what looked sloppy to me was exactly what God planned, right? And the reason it felt so sloppy was because it got me out of my comfort zone, right? And that's a big reason as to why a lot of us don't trust God. Because when he asks us to trust him, it means that we have to leave our comfort zone. We have to do stuff we aren't normally willing to do, right? We got to do stuff a different way. And as humans, we like doing things our way. And when we don't do things our way, we're not enjoying it, right? So another verse that a lot of people will reference whenever it comes to trusting God is Proverbs 3:5. So Proverbs chapter 3 verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding, right? That very last part of the verse is what people often tell you to do, to not lean on your own understanding, right? For example, when you're learning math for the first time, and not just simple math, right? Because everyone understands the concept of 1 plus 1, 2 times 2. When you're learning stuff like algebra and geometry, there's like, you can't just lean on your own understanding, because if you do, you're going to fail. You have to open your mind and listen to what the person who is teaching you is telling you, because if you just lean on your own understanding with that, as a person who doesn't have understanding of that to begin with, you're going to fail, right? If you introduce someone to algebra and show them a math problem and they try to replicate it and lean on their own understanding, they're 100% going to fail that. Unless they've been taught continuously. And at that point, it's not them leaning on their own understanding. It's them leaning on their own teaching, right? Because more often than not, we lean on our own understanding. When God tells us to do something, we're like, oh, that doesn't make sense, right? Another example: the Israelites. The Israelites, for example, God told them to go to this land, and when they saw the giants there, they said, "Yeah, God, that doesn't make any sense." And if you listened at the end of the verse, I'll read it again, the very end. I'll read verses 3 and 4 again. Um, so yeah, why is the Lord bringing us into this land to die by the sword? Our wives and children will become plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? So they said to one another, "Let's appoint a leader and go back to Egypt." So if you, I'll read that one more time too. The last verse, chapter 14 of Numbers, verse 4. So they said to one another, "Let's appoint a leader and go back to Egypt." So as soon as they ran into conflict in this specific sense, the first thing they thought was, yeah, God's crazy for this. What we're going to do is we're going to appoint a new leader who's going to take us back to Egypt, right? So one of the things I love about the Bible is that if you pay attention and you listen to the context of it and you reread verses, you'll understand like what's happening. And you can understand what's happening, but you can't understand like the perspective, the weight of the situation, right? So the weight of the situation right there is that they've been following Moses for the past 10, maybe 15 years into the wilderness, right? And he's been leading them successfully. He's been everything that's happened so far, he's done what he said he's going to do because God has told him to do it, right? And as soon as they run into trouble, the first thing I do is, yeah, Moses, it was awesome, kind of like hanging out with you, but we're gonna do our own thing and get somebody else. And you'll notice that they specifically, you'll notice that they specifically wanted to appoint another leader because they knew it, if they talked to Moses about it, he would tell them, no, this is what God told us to do and we're gonna do it. So they wanted to appoint someone else that would lead them so they could have an excuse to leave, right? So yet again, they wanted to appoint someone who would agree with them. They wanted to appoint someone who was on their side. Moses wasn't on their side because he was listening to God. And God had his own plans. And Moses was going at God's plans. And they didn't agree with it because they didn't understand why God would have them go somewhere where they could potentially die and have their wives and children taken as plunder. Right? So, I've been yapping for about 12 minutes. So we're going to try to finish this up soon with the next 5 minutes. So, how can we trust God? What are some things we can do to show God that we trust him? The first thing we can do when it comes to trusting God is reading his word, right? A lot of us procrastinate when it comes to reading the Bible, and it's understandable as to why I procrastinate, but I'm going to be honest with you. Procrastination does not help you. It doesn't. You got to get past it. As soon as you think of something you need to do, like for example, say you're walking upstairs and you're making food for yourself. As soon as the thought pops in your head, I need to wash the dishes, like because I'm making a mess, or I need to clean up, do that. Like, act on the thought as soon as it is. Now, I'm not sitting here telling you to act on on any thought that you have in your mind. Like, for example, I wouldn't tell you to act on the thought of punch somebody in the face because they called you stupid. No. Act on a thought that you know is the correct thought. So for example, you notice your laundry's piling up. Don't do it later. As soon as you notice that, take care of it. You notice your room's getting dirty. As soon as you notice it, take care of it. As soon as you feel the urge to read the Bible, read it. Even if you don't feel the urge to read the Bible, read it. Because there's going to be times where you don't want to read the Bible. I think a beautiful thing about our relationship with God, it shows how mature we are, right? For those of you out there who are seeking a relationship, you'll understand how mature you are based on how your relationship with God is, right? If you're having a bad day and you just don't read, excuse me, if you're having a bad day and you don't read your Bible because you're just having a bad day and you don't feel like doing it, guess what I want to translate for this for you, right? Imagine you're in a relationship with a boy or a girl, depending on your gender. If you're a girl, you're with a boy. If you're a boy, you're with a girl, right? Imagine this. You're having a bad day, so you don't talk to your girlfriend at all because you're having a bad day. Or you're having a bad day because, I don't know, maybe you're at a nail salon, you're a girl, right? Someone screwed up your nails, and you don't talk to your boyfriend at all that day. What does that say to them? Right? What does that say? We already know what it says to God. What it says to God is that you don't care enough because you had a bad day. Which, guess what? God has a bad day every day because you don't listen to him and do the stuff he asks you to do. You do it some of the time, but you don't do it all the time, right? So he has bad days every day, and he still loves you, and he still gives you things. He still gives you grace, right? You had one bad day, you had 2 bad days, even a bad week. While God has a bad year with you because you didn't get to where he wanted you to get. You made progress, but you didn't get where he wanted you to get. Understand how patient God is with you, and then how you reward him with that patience. You reward God's patience by not reading the Bible because one day you felt lazy and you didn't want to do it. Yet again, pay attention to how you treat God. For those of you who are seeking a relationship, because that's how you'll treat someone you're in a relationship with. That's why they say that. That's why it's said that you can't have a relationship with someone if you don't have a good relationship with God. You can't have a relationship with a girl if you're a dude if you don't have a good relationship with God. because you will treat her how you'll treat God. You'll ignore her on days that you're mad or upset or you don't want to talk, right? Moving on from that, yet again, another thing we can do to show God that we trust Him is surrendering, right? We can surrender things to Him, right? So, for example, one of the things I do a lot, often, I used to play. There was a game I used to play. I don't remember what it was called. It's not ringing a bell right now. But anyway, one thing I would always do is this game had a rotating shop. And for those of you who play games, you understand how a rotating shop works. Every day or every week, the shop rotates, and you can get cool new guns and cool new skins and whatnot, right? One of the things I did was I was like, you know what? I'm not really. This is hurting my relationship with God, right? Because every day I would get on the game and play, right, and try to see what I could get, and I would spend hours on hours upon hours playing the game, seeing what I could get in the shop, because the shop would rotate every once in a while if you played a certain amount of rounds, right? So one of the things I stopped doing was like, you know what? This game isn't really doing it for me. One, it's wasting money because every time the shop rotates, I do have to buy the gun. Two, I'm spending copious amounts of time in the game that I could be spending with God, this, that, and the third, right? So I just stopped playing the game, right? I occasionally go back and check my shop, but I just check it to see what's there. I don't buy anything. I just leave it alone, right? Another thing we can do is not just reading the Bible, but studying the Bible and understanding what is happening, right? Like I said, when you study the Bible instead of just reading it, you understand the context in a lot of situations and why things happen. Like, for example, something as Christians you're going to have to be able to explain one day to somebody is why God seems to unrighteously kill people, right? You're going to have to explain that a lot, which I do too. I explain that to a lot of people. Some people ask me a lot, why does God allow these people to die? Why did God kill that person at that point in the Bible, right? Like, a lot of people question why God killed, and I can't remember his name right now, but I'll actually look it up while we're still talking, right? There was a man who touched the Ark of the Covenant while it was being carried because he wanted to save it from getting dirty in the mud, right? And David was angry at God for killing this man because he touched the ark, even though God specifically told him. This was a thing that people knew about for years too. Like, this was something that was known since Numbers, and this is I think it happens in 2 Samuel. So this is over a course of at least 100 years that people have known not to touch the ark. This man knew not to touch the ark, but he still did it anyway, right? Which could have been because he was on fire for God. He was very zealous for God. It could have been because he wanted to look like a hero. It could have been for any amount of reason. But the point is, he knew he was not supposed to touch it because God told him not to, regardless of how he felt in that situation. And that is why that happened. When God tells us not to do something, we don't do it. That's just how it is. Especially when he's made it very clear over a course of 100 years plus, right? And to some of you, that might not be settling, but understand, God is the ultimate authority of our lives. He has given us a gift by letting us live. We owe everything to him. He doesn't owe us anything, right? Yeah, so let me look up let me look that up real quick. Okay, yes. So Uzzah, I think his name was Uzzah. His name was Uzzah. He touched the ark when it was falling over, and this ended up killing him. God killed him on the spot for that. Anyway, moving back to one of our final things, the final thing to trusting God is letting go of your understanding. Truly, letting go of your understanding. Letting go of your understanding, and then after that, acknowledging God's character. Truly, like I said before, if you let go of your understanding and acknowledge God's character, you'll be able to trust him more often, right? And what is God's character? God's character is that he's just, he's kind, and he's very patient, and he loves you. He loves you more than anyone else in this universe can love you. His love you can't even measure his love. You can take someone that you know loves you a lot and compare it to God's love, and it looks like nothing. That's how much God loves you. So when you understand the nature of God and his character, it becomes that much easier to trust him. And then on top of that, when you stop leaning on your own understanding, like, imagine you, a human being, trying to understand what the God of the universe is, like, saying. Imagine that. Like, for perspective, if God wrote the Bible, man would not be able to understand it. God's mind, I don't even know if God thinks the same way the human does. I'm pretty sure he doesn't. He's not bound by the same restraints that a human is. So he doesn't even think the same way he does. He might not even speak the same language that humans do. I'm pretty sure he doesn't. Because that's the whole idea of speaking in tongues, that it's a language that only God can understand, that is gifted to someone by the Holy Spirit, right? So God doesn't even think the same way you do, and you're trying to understand what he's telling you to do with your own understanding. Your limited human brain. This isn't me dogging on humans. This is me just putting it to scale on how it looks when you question God. Imagine you driving a car, like all of you I don't know how old all of you are. I'm sure some of you are in your 20s, 30s. Some of you are still teenagers. Some of you have just become 20. You're in college. Imagine 20, 30, 10 years from now when you have a kid. And imagine you're driving in the rain, right? And when you're driving in the rain, you hit a bump. And then your kid says, Mom, 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 Dad, Dad, slow down. You just hit something. Oh my gosh, slow down. Imagine how silly, imagine how, like, one, stupid that would sound. Your kid has no idea that you've been driving a car for 20 plus years and that you've driven in the rain before. But to him, he's in the back seat. He just experienced a bump. He doesn't know what's happening. He's freaking out, right? Which I know this happened because I know this because I did this before when I was a kid. This was like when I was maybe like 6 or 5. My mom and dad hit a bump on the road, and it was a big bump. It wasn't just like a speed bump. It was like a bump on the road. It might have been a pothole, right? And I felt that. And I told my mom, "You got to stop the car." She was like, "Why?" And I was like, "Cause you hit something." It's like, Sam, I know what I'm doing. I know how to drive, right? And she was definitely right. She's been driving for longer than I was born, so she was right, right? My child brain cannot comprehend the level of that situation. If I was older, I would have understood that she just hit a pothole, and I probably wouldn't have even reacted. Probably would have just kept on doing what I was doing. But yeah, that's it for our talk today about trusting in God. If any of you guys want to stay on for questions, that's cool. I'm here to answer them. But yeah, that is it. So thank you guys for joining. For those of you who obviously weren't able to attend, I'll just post this on YouTube for you guys to watch. So yeah, I'm gonna move over to the general voice channel so everyone can talk if they want to, because I know the stage makes it so that people can't talk because they're muted. So yeah, like I said, thank you guys for joining, and till then, guys, have a blessed day. Praying for all you guys. Yeah, thank you for attending.